Hello and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. Today is Saturday, July 25th, 2020. I mean, time is really flying. We are still talking about COVID-19. We started the deal back in March, mainly in response to talking about COVID-19 and what was going on in the world. And now we're all the way into July, almost August, and COVID is still a tremendous problem in the United States right now. As of this morning, there were 4,100,000 diagnosed with COVID, 146,419 confirmed dead, and 1,000 people dying per day over the last 8 days. In addition to that, there's so much other news going on, and I don't want to waste any time. I want to go ahead and bring in our regular Val Atkinson. Val, welcome back to the deal.
Thank you, Ed. Nice to see you.
Well, Val, I led off with the COVID numbers because it's just so, I just can't even get over it. I mean, it's like a Twilight Zone episode. I don't know how else to describe it. Tell me why we haven't gotten a handle on this yet. And do we expect, I mean, the president's talked a little bit differently this week, but I don't want to give him any credit because I don't think we would have been here had he not been so insensitive and not paying attention. But where are we this morning? I said 4 million confirmed cases. It's probably more. I said 146,000 dead. It's probably more. I said 1,000 dying per day, and it's probably more. Where are we at with COVID-19 as of today?
Well, one of the things to look at is the fact that the president has changed his campaign staff over the last few days and weeks. That has given him a different approach, as I see it. Some people may call it a little softening of the approach. I think it's a little difference in what this new campaign manager wants and how he sees and is trying to place him. I'm not sure it's going to work. This is real. This is not some sales game that he can pull back the plug and say, oh, I was just kidding. He's out on record as having said this is all going to go away like Puff the Dragon or whatever. One day there will be no more COVID-19. All of those things are going to be lingering around, and he's going to have to deal with them. This is real, and most people who are living today have never really ever had to experience anything like this. We can go back and read about some of the health issues, plagues, and the pandemic in the 19th century and some of those types of things, but nobody has lived through this. So it is very dangerous, and it is exceedingly dangerous for us, Ed, in getting to your question. Because of the type of culture that we have here, we are a group of extroverts. We believe in having a lot of fun. We don't like to hunker down. We are about exposing ourselves to whomever would listen. And this is tough when you're trying to fight something like COVID-19, because you are asked to wash hands, use sanitizers, wear masks, social distancing, and in some cases, you're even asked to self-quarantine. Those things are against our culture, all of them. So we find it difficult to do, and now we find elected officials are trying to force us into some of these things by making it mandatory to wear masks. Even some of our businesses are cooperating Walmart, McDonald's, two biggies, are saying, hey, if you want to do business with us, you got to be wearing a mask. This is so serious, it really befuddles the imagination as to how can somebody like Donald Trump not really be aware of how serious this is and take the kind of position that's going to lead us out of this, as opposed to making it a political football to see what he can gain. I think he's going to be on the losing end of this one, Ed. I think it's going to backfire on him. His strategy is not going to work.
Yeah, you're right, Val. That gives me a good opportunity to bring in our panel for today. We have a fortunate to have back Dr. Cheryl Catchings, who's a psychologist who's going to try to make some sense of what's going on in the world. But we have a new member of the team, Dr. Felicia Harris. Dr. Harris is an adjunct professor of Africana Studies and Women's Studies at University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and a Tar Heel, former All-American long jumper for the North Carolina Tar Heels back in the day when I was trying to run track myself. So, Dr. Harris, welcome to the deal.
Thank you, Ed. Such a pleasure to be with you.
Well, thanks for joining us, and Dr. Catchings, thanks for taking the time to come back with us. I'm gonna throw this out to everybody, but I get a sense that Val was talking about the president trying to change strategy and that kind of thing, and I think we're too far down the road. He hasn't proven to be a leader on this COVID thing, and it's obviously had a detrimental effect on African Americans. I'll throw this to you first, Cheryl. I still though see some African Americans who are not following the rules. I saw a story in one of the Alabama papers this week of Black college students in Alabama having a COVID party, and the person who got COVID first would win $500 from the pot. How do you explain that behavior, knowing full well that you got grandma and papa back home, and we are the ones that are suffering the worst from this?
There's really not a good way to explain it. There's so much that's happening in our culture and our community, and back to some of the things that Val was saying in his opening remarks. We have been suppressed for so long in the community, people don't even know who to follow or what to listen to. So when we're talking about the strategies that the administration and other folks are doing, we think that we should rebel. So if somebody says wear a mask, then we're going to do the opposite and not wear the mask. We have to follow the science, which is what we were talking about before. We have to follow the science because the culture and the community, when we talk about your life depends on it, that is a very true statement. It's not cliche just to throw out there. The bottom line is, with everything that is going on, with all the various layers, we have to be alive and healthy to vote. And if we don't like what the administration is doing, we have got to get the community, all ages, to understand that simple point. All eyes, all roads lead to the voting booth. There's no understanding it. I mean, we have some people that are picking all of the wrong things to do, and it might go against all of our principles, but living is part of our principle. And so we have to go back to the old school. I'm a village teacher, proud village teacher, and humbly accept that name. We have to protect the village. And we are not doing such a good job of it because we're being distracted by some of the other things that are causing us to think, oh, if I do this, if I do that. The bottom line is we have to be well, we have to be safe and well and alive in order to vote and turn this thing around. So that's what the focus needs to be. How can we get that out in the community so they see that wearing a mask is a good thing? And then for all of our brothers, don't wear a black mask, don't wear the bandana. We can get into all of that, be cool, come up with your D9 colors, come up with your favorite football team, but wearing a mask is paramount right now. And that's the message for the community. Wear the mask so that you can be safe and live to vote.
Yeah, so this week when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about on the show, and I thought about you, Dr. Harris, because you're on campus with young people all the time. And when I saw that story, it made me think, well, we've been praising all these young folks for being out there and protesting and being out in the streets and fighting for change or whatever. You're around young people all the time. What do you think about these young people today? I mean, I'm starting to sound like my dad and my grandparents. These young people today don't know what they're doing, but you're around them. Do you have any hope that we can trust them to do the right thing on this?
Well, I think it's a bit of a mixed bag, for another way to say it, because I do have hope in the kinds of things that I do see as it relates to the young people, that I've been able to, or had the pleasure to teach over these many years. So I do have some hope that they can do the right thing. The question you ask is, will they do, of course, the right thing? Will they do the right thing? Will they, in the midst of, all of the chaos around this, will they be able to not be so distracted to get caught up in, some things that are not going to be, of course, helpful and going to be more harmful to the community at large. But I have hope that they will do it. If we look at earlier movements, we of course can see, there were young people who were able to, make the right decision and decide that they want to protest. So I do have hope that they will, but at that age, we're talking about, young people, are they going to be willing, to take that step and understand their role generation down? And sometimes that's a bit much for them to process. Again, not being distracted by everything that's going on, particularly what they may see in the media, what's being said, how to decipher through what's true, what's not, being able to investigate. One of the things that I know I often like to say to students on campus is, investigate the truth, do your research. Don't always take things for face value, given, again, the political climate we're in. You do have to do what they call fact checking to make sure things are clear and not jump on the bandwagon of what might seem fun, but could be detrimental to not only you, but those in our community.
Yeah, I hear you. So Val, she talks about the political climate, and people are fond of saying that this is as divisive as we've ever been. I don't believe that. I think the Civil War was more divisive than this. But you're the historian, so I'm gonna defer to you. But talking about the political climate right now, we are heading into a very important election. All elections are important, but this presidential election may be the most important one that I can think of, other than the one that right before the Civil War, when Lincoln was nominated and won. How do you assess this election? I've been seeing polls this week that show Joe Biden leading in some weird places like Florida, like North Carolina, like places where, Texas, where it's supposed to be very tight. But we know that the political climate is, there's people out in the street protesting. What do these polls mean to you at this point, if anything, and what can we glean from them?
Well, right now, I'd like to go back to something we used to call the Wilder factor. And it had to do with Governor Doug Wilder when he was running for governor in Virginia. Right up until almost the last week or so of the election, he was ahead in most polls, double digit in some. And then when the election came, he barely won. I think somewhere around 1 or 2 point differences. And there were a number of people that admitted to poll takers after the election that they weren't absolutely truthful with poll takers because They didn't want anybody to think that they were racist or that they would never vote for a black man. So they told them that, yes, I'm going to vote for Wilder, but in fact, they knew all the time they were going to vote for Wilder's opponent. So we call that the Wilder factor. It happened out in California when one of our esteemed mayors, Tom Bradley, ran for the governor of California. And the same thing happened to him. This time he happened to lose, but he was leading in all of the polls. So we have to take some of the polls with a grain of salt. Some of them are very, very accurate. And you have to understand a little bit about poll taking surveys, questionnaires, and those kind of things to understand how they really work. But I would say that there's no poll that can be more important than the final day of voting. So that's what we need to do, is get out and vote. And let's count the ticks after November 3rd. But we can't let a poll decide whether or not we're going to participate in the electoral process or not. I'd like to go one step further, and I'll allow you to move on, Ed. But I wanted to talk about the results of the poll, the Electoral College, gracefully giving up the position, and I'll do it very succinctly. Donald Trump has talked about he'll have to see the results before he can decide whether or not he will accept them. That is throwing a little red meat to his base, saying, even if I lose the popular vote or the Electoral College vote, I may not concede. The fix may be in, and I may have to get my attorney general to do a long-term investigation, and I'll just stay in office until he tells me what the results are. You're talking about a constitutional crisis. It goes beyond that. It goes to something that you talked about earlier, civil war. I mean, I hate to use those words, but I'm not sure how many people would sit still for Donald Trump just deciding that our votes don't count and he cannot be moved from office. Constitutional crisis is what we'll have.
Well, thanks for scaring me sufficiently, Val, because I don't want to hear that. Look, it's time for us to take a break. We're going to take a break. When we come back, I want to come back to Dr. Felicia Harris, who's joining us from LA today. I want to talk to her about whether or not Joe Biden needs to choose a woman, and whether that needs to be a black woman for him to make sure that he becomes the president. So everybody, just hold on just a minute. We'll be right back after this message. Welcome back to The Deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and we got another all-star panel this week. Dr. Cheryl Catchings, who's in Nashville today, Dr. Felicia Harris, who is out in LA today, and Val Atkinson from lovely Holly Springs, North Carolina today. And I'm joining you from Raleigh, North Carolina. We've been talking about a lot of stuff. We started off talking about COVID, and I promised when we came back, I wanted to talk to Dr. Harris about something, because she talks about women's studies and Africana studies at UNC Charlotte. And Dr. Harris, one of the things that has come up is, who is Joe Biden going to pick as his running mate to be vice president? And he said it was going to be a woman. So we know that part of it. of the equation. But the second part is, will it be a Black woman, and does it have to be? So I'm going to throw that to you first. Does Joe Biden need to pick a Black woman to piggyback off of what Val was talking about to solidify the victory for Joe Biden? Will Black folks stay at home if it's not a Black woman?
Well, right now I know, he's under quite a bit of pressure, to pick an African American woman, and whether that will swing individuals' choices to come out and vote. I agree with Val without looking at the pollsters. It'll be interesting, right? And if people are looking at the polls, his strong polling right now may have some impact to who and what what he decides to pick. What we do know right now is he's of course vetting a number of individuals. But the question is, will he be looking for an individual, of course, that's going to help? Or I think in some of the materials I was reading, they were using the word "do no harm."
Speaking of the do no harm, specifically, I'm gonna ask you a couple names. How about that? How about Kamala Harris? Does that hurt or help?
Given her background, she has, of course, Senate work, her participation with running for the Democratic nomination. And I know, with her work in the Senate, that may help. And I think if we think about that, and I think about it, of course, from the, perspective of looking at women's role in the political process. I guess I have two perspectives, and I always go back to, of course, John McCain and the whole fiasco.
Sarah Palin.
With Sarah Palin. But this is not the case, given who people are presuming a pick may be. So if it's Kamala Harris. If it's, let me think of a couple of names. That
Val Demings maybe, or I've heard Val Demings come up.
Yes, I've heard her as well. And then they were talking about, should it necessarily be an African American woman and a woman in general? Will that help in terms of that? I think with this election, we're dealing with a situation we haven't seen quite like this in some time. And so, of course, there's going to be a couple of things to consider. I know some of the materials I was reading, people thinking about, okay, well, he's 78. Well, maybe he'll pick somebody, who's going to balance that out. That could be Black or white, if we were thinking from that context. Stacey Abrams. Bottoms in Atlanta. So there has been a long list. From my perspective, given the role that women have had historically, I don't know if the selection, if it's not an African American woman, will that dramatically change who goes out and vote again, given the whole context of what this political process is looking like. My hope is there are individuals out there that would do fine, like a Kamala Harris. Is that going to be a symbiotic relationship? Again, is the question.
Yeah, that is the question. Yeah,
that's what I'm thinking. People in his circle are looking at. I think somebody threw out Valerie Jarrett's name.
Yes.
So. Will there be, again, this may not be the bromance he had with, President Obama, but someone who's going to really be able to, support him in that role.
Yeah, I'm gonna throw this to you, Dr. Catchings. I mean, obviously he's made the promise that he's going to select a woman. What do you hear in your circles? Will Black women help prepare. I mean, because we've seen Black women sort of be the linchpin in a lot of cases, like in Alabama when Doug Jones won. I mean, had it not been for Black women mobilizing, we would not have Doug Jones in Alabama. Will Black women go out and support, say, an Elizabeth Warren or Amy Duckworth as opposed to a Val Demings or Kamala Harris?
Well, I have some mixed feelings on that. And, part of the discussion is I was happy to hear when he made that announcement that he was going to pick a woman of color as his running mate, although it might have been premature to say it then, because I agree with Dr. Harris. Now there's so much pressure on him. And I think that if it's too late to change now. It's too late to change now. He is going to have to look at who is going to be the best for him in a lot of ways, the best for all of us in a lot of ways, and then look at some of the other notable positions, Attorney General, the head of DHS, and put people in other positions that they would be good at, not do like the current administration, let me pick my millionaire friends that have no background whatsoever. I mean, there's a lot riding on this November 3rd election. And when I'm so encouraged when I see what the young women are doing out in the protesting right now. I wish that they were a little bit more organized and there was a cohesive, consistent message that they were all looking at, because I think that there's power in numbers, and right now it still is somewhat fragmented to me. But I do see the young women of color are in the front row, and they're taking charge, they're standing up, and I love their energy, but I think it just needs to be more focused in order to make it be effective. And that consistent message will push people to the polls. And we just have to get away from all of the other distractions. The point is changing the administration. I mean, we have to really be laser focused. What is that message and how do we get there?
Yeah. Well, Val, I've told people this. If an orangutan is running as the Democratic nominee and he has a bonobo as his running mate, I'm voting for them. I don't see that there's any option other than voting for whoever the Democratic nominee. There's nothing really. Kanye is not an option. I know, just because it's so disturbing to even think about. Kanye is not an option. If the Green Party came up with somebody, or libertarians or whatever, that's not a real option to get Donald Trump out of the White House. So Val, this whole notion that Biden promised that he was going to have a woman as a running mate, what was, like Dr. Cashin said, was that premature? Should he have just said, okay, I'm gonna give all consideration to whoever the best person is going to be? Or in this case, in this election cycle, does the vice president even make a difference in light of who he's running against?
I think you said it best last, Ed. In this cycle, in this election, it matters less, simply because this election primarily is about Donald Trump. And as long as the Democratic Party and Joe Biden can keep the center of attention on Donald Trump, they have an excellent chance to win. They are looking for, they meaning the Republicans, the GOP, and Donald Trump, are looking for alternative narratives. They are looking for something to change the subject matter. So when we're talking about selecting a VP or any decision that has been made, it should all go through the filter of, am I giving the GOP a talking point? Am I changing the narrative here? That should be the question more than anything else. I credit George W. Bush for doing something that I give Biden credit for now. If you recall, George Bush said that if he wins the election, so this was prior to the general election, he was going to nominate Colin Powell as his Secretary of State. He made that decision way out front, hoping to get some black votes. It didn't help him that much in the total scheme of things, but it was a first time that a presidential candidate kind of laid his hand out there and said, this is what I'm going to do. So I think it's fine for Joe Biden to have done that. That's fine. I agree with Cheryl and Dr. Harris on the notion that we need to do something to energize and excite our base for what I call Uber voter turnout. We have got to get a big turnout. That's going to be the key. This is not going to be an election about persuasion. This is going to be an election about turnout. And if you beat the other guy in turnout, you win. As I say on your show and a lot of other shows, Ed, there are only 3 people in the United States of America who have made up their mind about Trump and Biden, okay? So there's not a gazillion people in the middle who are still saying, oh, Biden, Trump, I don't know, they're about 6 in one hand and half dozen in the other. That's not the case. Mm-hmm. Most people have already made up their minds about this. The question is, who's going to be successful at getting their group to the poll? And I think more money should be spent on getting your group to the poll than trying to persuade those 3 people in Iowa who have in front of them a ledger, an abacus, and a Ouija board trying to figure out who to vote for, right? That's crazy. That is not the way things are done anymore. This is not about persuasion.
Yeah. Yeah, it is not at this point. I want to remind the folks you're watching The Deal with Ed Clark, and we got an all-star panel today. Dr. Felicia Harris, who's joining us from LA today, Dr. Cheryl Cashings, who's in Nashville, and Val Atkinson, who's our regular politics commentator, and myself, Ed Clark. And we've been talking about a number of issues. I'm going to switch gears a little bit. I am also really concerned about these federal troops that have been showing up in cities and taking people off the street in some sort of extrajudicial actions, and they're dressed in fatigues. We don't know exactly who they are. I did see some of the patches on some of the uniforms, and they belong to private companies who are contracted by DHS, which is very troubling to me. But the fact is that a lot of young people are out there protesting. We've talked about these protests. Now I'll throw this back to Dr. Harris. Obviously, I mean, when we were young people too, we were upset about, say, the statue on the campus at UNC, Silent Sam, and we wanted that removed, and we wanted a Black Student Union, and we sat in on campus for those actions. We wanted the Black Cultural Center, and that finally got built on campus at UNC back in the day. As you see these protests, a lot of these kids are not Black kids, they're white kids. And that's a lot different than when we were out protesting. It used to be just us, and with the George Floyd thing, it seems to be that was some sort of trigger, I think, because it's on video and it was so heinous and violent and whatever. Have you talked to any of the students? I know, the school year hasn't gotten started yet, and so you haven't seen any students yet. But we were in March, and they had to start to cancel classes and have classes, online and those kind of things. Did students talk any at all about, what they had seen with the George Floyd thing, and did you know students who were going out to protest?
So of course, during the summer we're online, but one of the areas that I've worked on campus is with some of the student athletes, of course. That's just kind of my passion and background. And we have done actually a couple of sessions with our student athletes in, of course, this transition period on campus. And part of the focus was just on your question in seeing the diversity, for lack of a better word, the diversity of young people, out and about, and in those facilitated sessions. I'll think about a couple of examples. So one of the examples, of course, was, what did you think about, what happened to George Floyd? And there were, I think there's a couple of football players, I believe, one in particular who, I think I probably had him in class before, but was talking about this whole notion that even though he knew things like this had happened before, this hit him hard watching, his teammates afraid to go out of the apartment, not realizing whether or not they would come back. So for young people, I think it is, and I would agree with what you said, it has hit them in a different way. And then to have, again, teammates, lots of teammates, because our football program probably resembles a lot of programs around the country in terms of, what that even looks like, the diversity on the field. So to actually experience in close proximity, with a teammate, what that feels like, I think a lot of them are feeling this in a way, maybe intellectually reading about it may not resonate, with the same degree of, like you said, shock and, is this happening, and explaining this has been happening for some time. Technology has made it, of course, a lot more accessible for people to see, cases, isolated cases that are happening, or it feels isolated when we know it's technically been happening. If you, look back at early amendments, we can go all the way back to 1833 when they said if we were, if we were free, and there were things put in where the police could pick you up for petty crimes, and you would then be recycled back to the plantation or be used in that way to continue, perform labor. So to make those gaps so that 2020, seems like this is just not new. We just now see it. We can see it. You can see it. So in those facilitated sessions, it's been interesting to notice how they have responded, of course, with, how devastating it is to see somebody die, and then to see the other things going on around them at the same time.
Yeah, I hear you. Val, I want to add, Dr. Harris mentioned something. She works with athletes, and there's been this ongoing discussion about whether or not African-American young men should consider going to HBCUs to perform their services at HBCU instead of going to a majority college. And there's been a couple high-profile cases recently where one of the top basketball recruits is already pledged to Howard University, as opposed Duke wanted them, UNC, all the big schools wanted them. In light of some of the reactions from some of these coaches, we have heard some of these, especially at the Southern schools, some of these football coaches have said some things that would make you believe that they don't support, Black Lives Matter, or not even the organization Black Lives Matter, but just the whole concept that these Black young men have free will and should be making decisions on their own. That these coaches make a lot of money, Val, and do Black students need to look at maybe going somewhere else?
That's always an option, Ed, and I personally applaud folks who are close to these athletes, parents, coaches, counselors, others, advising them to take a look at the entire waterfront. It's not a case anymore where you're looking at where will I best be suited for 4 years because of the one and done situation where kids are just playing 1 year and then going on to the NBA. And a lot of coaches now in what we call PWIs, predominantly white institutions, are showing their disdain for the one and done. Right here in Durham, North Carolina, Coach K, of all people, he doesn't like it. He's got to play by the rules and he's not going against them, but I don't think he embraces one and done. He wished that he could have a kid for 2, 3, 4 years and bring him along as he's done over the past. But now that brings into question, if you've got to spend 1 year someplace in an accredited college or university, why not try out an HBCU? A question becomes, will they come to see? If I build it, maybe they'll come in and take a look at it. That's already been answered. When Tracy McGrady was playing his high school ball right here in Durham, North Carolina, there were people outside the gymnasium lined up around the block, and they were not all black either. And people were coming to watch him play because he was a superior ball player. Same thing happened in my day. I go way back and I date myself when I talk about the Pearl, Earl Monroe, when he used to play with Winston-Salem State University. People from all over were coming to watch him play. So people will come and watch you play if you got good talent. And I think it's something to consider by the kids, their parents and counselors who are helping that kid make that decision. Where are they going to spend that 1 year until the NBA and the NCAA get their act together and determine how they're going to handle and manage the one and done? I think the kids ought to make the best decision for themselves and their families.
Yeah, I hear you. You know, all these subjects overlap, Dr. Catchings. You know, we were talking about it off mic before we even came on today about Colin Kaepernick. You know, it sounds like a sports story, but it really isn't. Talk to me about what you were saying earlier about the importance of Colin Kaepernick outside of sports now, what his role probably should be as they contemplate having the NFL start back up. You know, what do you see as Colin Kaepernick's role, you know, maybe not as a quarterback anymore?
You know, what we were talking about is the fact that, you know, we are hoping, you know, that he sees the role that he's playing in general society and the culture community in the nation as much bigger than where it started. Yes, he's taken a lot of flack, and of course he was a premier athlete. So I can understand his passion for it, individually thinking he wants to go back and prove to people that he was wronged. But I think the whole world knows that he was wrong. You know, even for the commissioner to come on and say, I was wrong, let's sit down and talk. I agree with Val. Him going and taking a new created position back at the NFL, to me, would not be the best choice. I think that you know, he has the position, the influence now to do some great things across the nation, not only for other athletes, the young athletes looking up to him for who he was, but just across the nation. When we're talking about then, I keep going back to that strategy across the nation to empower people and to move people to the polls. And I think that if he and folks like him, LeBron and the rest of them can see your role in the community, it might have started out, the venue to be in the community, to be seen and heard, may have started with, you know, being a good athlete. And that's just one of the gifts that God has given you, but it has led you to a much larger role. And people need to be able to accept it and walk into that, because the situation with Kaepernick, the situation with LeBron, Tracy, you know, Jawan, and, you know, I mean, every time I see the Fab Five, any of them doing things from University of Michigan, you know, my heart just leaps, because it's like they have learned that their role is so much bigger than the sport that got them there. And I that's where I want him to see and to use that platform for the much greater good.
Yeah, that's a good point. This is a good place to take our next break, and then when we come back, we're going to wrap up. I do want to get back to some politics stuff. I want to talk about what is the likelihood that there actually will be a COVID relief bill. What is it going to look like? And then I also want to talk about a little more deeply this whole notion of using secret police to take people off the street. So stay with us. We'll be right back after this message.
It takes less than 1 minute to find out if you may have prediabetes, and you can do it here. So what are you waiting for? Just go to the site.
Here are AARP's top tips on caregiver preparedness during coronavirus. Form a caregiving team. Inventory essential supplies and medications. Make a plan to stay connected. Maintain self-care and follow CDC guidelines. Learn more on our website.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark, and we're fortunate today to have another all-star panel of folks talking about a number of things. We've been everywhere from the rent moratorium that expired last night, which I think is going to be critically important. People are going to get hit with a big bill for their rent. Some people haven't paid since March, and evictions are going to ratchet up. I'm not sure what the outcome's going to be. We need to watch that. We've talked about the number of COVID cases right now. As of this morning, there were 4,100,000, 146,400 dead, and 1,000 people dead per day for the last 8 days straight, which are not good numbers. And so we've talked about a range of things, and we just finished talking about sports and how sports plays into all of this, whether Black kids should think about going to HBCUs and putting their services somewhere else. In light of everything that's going on, there's so much going on. I want to turn back to the panel, though, in this last bit of time we have. I want to concentrate on something that's going on. I went back and I was looking at what went on in Nazi Germany prior to, Hitler taking over. And then immediately before he was able to organize these goon squads, the brown shirts and folks like that, to harass people. And when he got in charge, he made, the state did it instead of just these ad hoc people. These folks in Portland, Oregon, and I'll throw this to you first, Val. These people in Portland, Oregon, they have patches that, don't belong to the United States military, because United States military would not do this. They don't belong to the state police of Oregon, and they don't belong to any organizations that we recognize as normal police, like Secret Service or FBI. Who are these people? What are they doing? What is the danger of this?
Well, let's talk about it from a legal standpoint first. They have to have some sort of legal cover. And what they've chosen to do is to say that they are there to protect federal buildings. So now that allows them to come in with people like a part of Homeland Security, which is a state operation. It allows them to even come in with people from the Justice Department, FBI, whatever. But they cannot go outside of that and say they are there to protect City Hall, because that has to be initiated by the city itself or whatever. So they've thought this through, and they know where their boundaries are. I agree with you, Ed. The problem's going to come in when someone steps over their line, the boundary. When the federal people there go into city run things or privately run things and try to protect that, or when the protesters or whatever actually go too far and try to access a federal building there, what's going to happen then? But all of this is based on two things. This goes back to campaigning, Ed. This is allowing Trump's base to say, good, somebody's standing up and telling them we ain't going to take this land down and we can fight back too. Okay? It's allowing them to have that bravado coming out of them and being a part of this whole thing. But secondly, he's trying to take a page out of Richard M. Nixon's book. What did he run on? Richard M. Nixon ran on law and order in '68, when all of the protests were going on in the street, when people were protesting the Vietnam War, people were protesting the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and Robert Kennedy. The streets were filled up every day, all day with protesters. I know, I lived in DC in '68 and '69. I was there. So this is what he's trying to do. He's aware that you can have the whole world against you today if you can show that the citizens of the United States of America are at risk of being overrun and taking over and instill fear into them, they will vote for you and support you when they really don't want to. And that's what he's trying to do. He's trying to get to the point to create a certain level of fear within the American public that they say, whatever happens, we can go to Biden later, but right now I need law and order.
Yeah. Well, Dr. Harris, I'm really afraid of young people. Say they go to Chicago and they try to do the same thing, and they try to go up in the hood and try to restore law and order like the president says he's going to do. He called Mayor Lightfoot and said that he's sending people there whether she likes it or not, and they're going to help restore law and order. And then some gunfight takes place and some people get killed. That's what I'm afraid of, that this thing is going to get ratcheted up to the point where people are dying. What do you think about the whole approach that the president is taking with these cities? Why I think I know why he's targeting certain cities. How do you assess that?
Well, he's taking a look at, I'm not sure who you're.
Yeah. I'll throw it to Dr. Harris and we'll come back to you, Val.
Right.
From a historical context, what I see going on goes all the way back to, and I think it was one of the things I even brought to the attention of the young people who were on the facilitation, because I think one of the questions we were talking with them about was this whole notion of, institutionalized racism and what that is, and that you can't look at it in a vacuum. And this whole idea of fear, I mean, we can go all the way back again to enslavement to see that as a mechanism of power. And when you have, what did I hear? The recording that they have that's being advertised. I hear it on CNN where it says you've called and the police can't get to you for 5 days. And the example they give, if you've been raped, we know that's one of those historical tools of fear. Fear of course, violence, and fear, that our women are, and for all purposes, white women are going to be raped, but there's nobody to take care of them. So now we're going to take care of them. Yeah. That ad is like everywhere. So I see it from a historical context. Fear and power, you instill fear from all, we can look at it, even from historical trauma. We're traumatized people, and people are going to look in terms of, who's going to protect, as you said, who's going to protect our communities. They're coming into our communities and your property value is going to go down. So this whole idea of fear, again, is another distraction, but it works in the political scheme of things.
Yeah, and Dr. Cash, the same question to you. Dr. Harris is right. I mean, if you watch the commercials that Donald Trump is running in a lot of places, he's running on, you should be afraid that your women are going to be attacked, and we got to protect you. I mean, those are old tropes, but they still work after all this time, don't they? Yeah.
Yeah, they do. They do still work, and I agree with everyone else. I have huge concerns about where they're coming from and what is their mission, because my understanding is that some people have been arrested, detained, picked up and thrown in the van, and they were not even near any federal buildings. So they are expanding their territory and because there have already been reports on the news that people have been picked up, and then it's like they're being detained, they're being taken where and for how long? What is happening in these vans? What's happening in these places that have already been pre-identified, pre-set up? So it's almost like a mission, let's go out and pick up X amount of, protesters or people. And that's really scary because, again, back to our young folks, that's traumatizing. So if me and my group, if I'm the leader of a group, I'm protesting peacefully, I get picked up, what am I coming back to my group? Is that going to energize them to do more, or is that going to make them so scared that they're going to retreat?
Yeah, I hear you, man. There's just so much to talk about. I mean, there's no, this president, it's like a story a second with him. It's incredible how much we've been through in the last 4 years. And we got a little bit of time left. I want to throw it back to Val to end up here. Val, tell me why I should be encouraged by anything. We've talked about so much this morning, and I'm trying to figure out, Mitch McConnell doesn't have a bill at all on the table of anything that's going to help anybody. This COVID-19 isn't going away. The protests aren't going away. These secret police aren't going away. Sports are trying to start back with no fans in the seats. I could just keep going down the list. What am I supposed to be encouraged about here, Val?
The biggest piece of encouragement I can lay out, Ed, is one of a comparative nature. When I look back at the riots of 68, 69, and I look at the crowd out there, I didn't see any white people. As a matter of fact, I had a dear friend of mine who was involved in an interracial relationship, and his girlfriend wanted to go out and down to 14th and U Street. That was the epicenter of the 68 riots after Martin Luther King. And we all knew how dangerous it would have been for her to be on the street, being a white girl at that time. They painted her face brown with shoe polish and put on caps and hats and did a lot of things so she could go out with them in the protests and to see what was going on, the rock throwing and whatever. It was like a show. My point is there were no white people out there. This time it's different. I just attended a few weeks ago a Black Lives Matter protest here in Holly Springs, North Carolina, the Mecca of the Southeast. But at any rate, there were rarely did I find many black people in this protest. Everybody carrying Black Lives Matter signs, George Floyd signs. These were all white people. I refuse to believe that they're going to carry these signs and go to the polls and vote for Donald Trump. I refuse to believe that they're not going to go home and try to expand. I refuse to believe that when questioned by their relatives and their friends, they're not going to continue to support this movement. That's the difference. That's what you can bank everything on, and Donald Trump can't do anything about. He's not going to sway them over. He's not going to convert them into racists and neo-Confederates and neo-Nazis overnight. And he knows that's the only way he can probably win. So you should be buoyed about that. Don't worry about anything. We're going to win.
Well, and I'll throw the same question to you, Dr. Catchings. You got any good news as we end today?
I think that we just need to be encouraged. You know, the one concern that I still do have is that as we get closer to November 3rd, that things may start to escalate. So that's a concern that I have. But I absolutely agree with Val. People that are coming out now at whatever age, whatever level, wherever they are, that are voicing their protests, that they are absolutely going to go into the polls and vote correctly. And my big thing for you to be encouraged is that I think that there's some folks that don't want to necessarily be vocal, but they're going to go in and they're going to vote correctly as well. Now it's the reverse. People were afraid for some other reasons in the past with the polls and everything else. But I think there's some people that almost, if you will, in the closet, they're going to vote as well too, because they are now afraid and they see the error of some of the decisions they made in the past.
Yeah, and then I'll end up with you, Dr. Harris. What do I got to be encouraged about? How are we going to encourage the audience here?
Well, you know, we are, of course, strong people, and if we look historically with the cycle of what we're seeing, because we've seen other instances where maybe not quite at this extreme, but I'm encouraged again, just seeing the diversity and the sheer differences that people are acknowledging of what's been happening, for many, many years. So I'm encouraged that people will make the right decisions as long as we get people out voting. However that mechanism is, you have to vote. So if we know mail-in votes might not work the way that we're thinking, then be prepared, as we were talking, vote early. Whatever that mechanism is, we got to get people out voting. So I am encouraged.
I hear you. Well, yep. We're going to be talking about voting nonstop probably over at least until November the 3rd here. So if you don't want to hear it, you help plug your ears. Dr. Felicia Harris joining us today from LA. Dr. Cheryl Cashing joining us from Nashville. Val Atkinson all the way over in the metropolis of Holly Springs, North Carolina. And then me here in Raleigh. I just want to thank everybody for tuning in today. We got a special program next week. I had promised this week that Nolan Smith, the assistant basketball coach at Duke, was going to be on this week. His birthday is today. So so I gave him a break and I told him he could come in next week. So Nolan Smith, he promised me he'll be here next Saturday for the deal. He wants to talk about his initiative that he has going on in Durham, talking to young men out on the street. He's actually getting out on the street and talking to guys and trying to find out why they're killing each other, why they're not in school, why they're not doing the things they need to do to get us all in the right direction. So that's Nolan Smith next week. And even though he went to Duke, we're going to talk to him anyway. In the meantime, what I want you to do is do something good for somebody this week. Tell people about the deal with edclark.com. We have regular columns out there every week. And then tomorrow, listen to Val Atkinson on Connections on Foxy 107, 104 in the Triangle. And then I'll be on with him tomorrow, and we'll be talking to the director of the health department in Durham. Right, Val?
Yes.
And
Dr. Jenkins will be on to talk about the impact of COVID-19, and not only in Durham, the city of Medicine, but the entire Triangle area.
That's right. So in the meantime, we'll be back next week on the deal, and go out and check the deal with edclark.com and foxync.com. If you want to listen to Connections, it's on at 8 a.m. on Sunday mornings on Foxy 107, 104 in the Triangle and streaming online. I hope you have a good weekend, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.